Britain lost World War II. Here's why. I've come to the conclusion that the United Kingdom and the Allies generally actually lost World War II. I think there's 4 reasons for this, and I mean this almost literally. So certainly they essentially lost it for reasons I'll get into, and very close to kind of literally lost it. As we've just had VE Day, supposedly, I'd call it more DE Day, Defeat in Europe Day, and D is also short for German. I thought it'd be a good time to make this video. This video is going to be pretty controversial. It's going to upset a lot of people. I hope, though, that you'll see it's grounded in facts. World War II is particularly relevant to us as it's the moral origin story of our culture, and it still influences us in massive ways. So if you're interested in psychology, philosophy, certainly politics today, this is well worth looking at. It's also true because it's the moral origin story, we're coming up to some taboos. So buckle up. All right, let's just start with a straightforward, what were the aims for Britain in World War II, and to a lesser extent the Allies. But I'll start with the UK. So I just put this into ChatGPT. I said, what were Britain's aims in World War II? Stop German domination of Europe. Okay, so the Germans dominate Europe. Now, I mean, they do. They dominate the EU and economically, so that aim wasn't met. Second one, to preserve the British Empire. Well, within 20 years of World War II ending, the British Empire had completely collapsed, and it started collapsing immediately after World War II. So that goal wasn't met. Third goal, survival of homeland. For reasons I'll come to, clearly not the case. Britain, as was then in 1939 when the war began, simply does not exist anymore. That homeland has not survived. Next goal of Britain in World War II, to maintain some kind of prosperity. Britain is not now a wealthy country. I travel widely in Europe, and it's clear to me in terms of sort of real standards of living, Britain is not prosperous. We've essentially bankrupted ourselves with World War II. Whenever I'm in sort of Scandinavia, for example, Switzerland, even places like Slovenia and Croatia, I think, you know what, the standard of life just looks a lot better here. Anecdotally, I'm now visiting the UK, and as soon as I got here, I was just like, what a dump. A little survey I did actually said that if people had another passport, 3/4 of my friends would leave the UK. So it's pretty anecdotal. So it's just a little survey, but I think it just shows people get, particularly people who have travelled, we are not now a prosperous country. More broadly, we could say Britain's aim for World War II was to maintain global influence. We're the least influential we haven't been. Like, Russia just laughs at us. We're an irrelevant little country that's frankly America's bitch at this point. So that's point 1 of 4 I'm going to make, that simply we lost World War II just based on our goals for World War II. I don't know how you could say we met those goals, like empire, prosperity, Germany not running Europe. We lost. So that's the first and most literal one, but I think in some ways the least interesting of the 4 I'm going to espouse here. Okay, reason 2. We have been invaded. Now, this is emotive language, but it's factually the case. So, I'm in London. London is now official number 36% British. Unofficial number, with unrecorded people, under 30%. I'd say something like 25%. So the idea of British people being replaced in the capital, this isn't a theory. It's definitely not a conspiracy theory. It's a democratic fact, even by government figures. I mean, I was just walking by a school yesterday. I'm in Islington, central London, home of the Champagne Socialists. Sort of relatively nice area, though. Honestly, it's terrifying in terms of the urban degradation now. Certainly far less safe than it would have been in 1939. I was walking by school, and I heard like 10 languages going on. And people often say, oh, at least we're not speaking German. It's like, yeah, but we're speaking Swahili and Somali and Pushtun. And it's like, the idea of we even has been disintegrated. The absolute gaslighting that's happened around this. People saying, okay, yeah, Britain hasn't been invaded. Okay, well, hang on. How do we define an invasion? How about this? A non-consensual movement of people into a country with a pre-established group. Like, that would be a pretty normal standard definition. There's never been a democratic mandate for mass migration. Now, I am from a family of migrants. I'm a migrant myself elsewhere. Migrants are not always bad people. Often they're very good people. But there hasn't been a democratic mandate for this. Whenever there was polled at any point from the war to today, the vast majority of British people said, we do not want this. Brexit essentially was an unofficial poll for that as well. People saying no more migration, and actually the traitorous class that we have poured migration into this country. Now, people say Britain's always been a nation of migrants. No, it hasn't, okay? Since, let's see, the last 1,000 years, the population of this country has been relatively stable. You know, a few Huguenots here and there, a little bit of this group or that group, but tiny numbers. A little bit of fresh water, I'd say it's good for a culture, good for a society, but certainly the numbers that have come in recently. 1.2 million last year. Again, official number, so unofficial number, a lot more. Completely unsustainable. This is an invasion. People don't want it. There are negative consequences economically, socially, in terms of crime, etc. Don't need to talk about the gangs in the north of England, for example. Finally has made the news because we have a traitorous media class that pretend this isn't happening. Then they say, well, it is happening, but it's a good thing. And then they say, yeah, it is happening. It's inevitable anyway. There's nothing you can do about it. And because of this continuous harking back, this hypervigilance, we call it in the trauma world, to World War II, the narrative is anyone who objects to this is, I can't say it because it's YouTube, which says something, a mid-20th century German. That's what you are if you object to this, even though just normal people object to it. The worst thing you can be in our culture is a racist. Why is that the worst thing? I don't think it's a good thing, calm down. But why is it the worst thing? Why has that culturally been made the worst possible thing? Because the hypervigilance from World War II, and you know, one could get more conspiratorial about this, the support that exists, particularly from global finance, for the mass movement of people. So this is actually a leftist analysis rather than people saying, yeah, everything's far right now, right? Why is everything far right? Because World War II said that this is what's too far right. But we didn't say what's too far left. Which way around is it? Okay, we didn't say which way's too far left. So what you have when you define one side of things as bad, it's literally, this is what defines evil, World War II, right? It is a constant creep the other way. Constant creep the other way. A part of that is what the right does well is boundaries. What the left does well is acceptance, right? It's kind of masculine, feminine, yin and yang. So if you say all boundaries are bad because the right defines what is bad. The Soviets didn't define what was evil, even though they were just as evil as the mid-20th century Germans. Yeah, I can say Soviet on YouTube. And certainly the Japanese did terrible things in World War II, yet they don't define what's evil. What defines it is the mid-20th century Germans, a moustache man. I feel so silly saying these things. And what that means is culture slid further and further left. I'll come back to that one. But one of the main things we've lost is a sense of boundaries. One of those boundaries is the idea that a people get to say who live in their country. This is a total normal idea. I'm in a house right now. I get to say who's in my house. You get to say who's in your body. Boundaries are normal things. Yet they've been defined as wrong. Generous answer, generous explanation because of the hypervigilance. Post-World War II, the defining morality in only one way. Less generous answer that global capital wants people it can move around to keep rents high and payroll down. So I don't think migrants are bad people in and of themselves. My own family are migrants. My granddad fought in World War II in order to earn the right to settle here. So I think he earned his place, not necessarily people do now. It's not the people. People just want a better life, right? People can be good or bad people wherever. But there is a traitorous class, I think economically motivated and culturally motivated on the left too, who have allowed a complete invasion of the UK. Invasion is the right word. People are not consenting to this. People have a right to their homeland. The indigenous people of a country have rights. We would acknowledge this in any other place. I think rightly we look back on crimes and say, you know what, the indigenous people there were wiped out. You know, people were invaded, colonized. How is this different? How is this different? Britain will be majority non-native by 2050, non-Indigenous majority by 2050, according to independent surveys. This isn't a crazy conspiracy theory. I mean, the fact that the top baby's name in the UK is Mohammed, I mean, it's kind of obvious. You walk by a primary school, it's completely obvious. Most of the kids there aren't of British nationality. And again, the gaslighting around that, they're saying that Britain being British doesn't exist. You can do Britain face. Anyone who says they're British is British. A passport makes you... A passport's just a bit of paper. It doesn't make you British. It's completely ridiculous. Finally, this conversation is being had belatedly to our grandparents, great-grandparents around the time of World War II, this would have been completely obvious, completely obvious. The way I present it to some of my liberal friends is this: do Japanese people have a right to Japan? If you went to Tokyo and it was only 30% Japanese, wouldn't you find that a bit odd at the very least, and actually morally wrong if Japanese people had been against that movement of people into Japan? By the way, in Japan, this isn't a question. Japanese people are like, we're Japanese, this is our country. They didn't have the kind of post-World War II guilt that a lot of European nations have been forced upon them. So we absolutely have been invaded. That is the right word. Again, it doesn't mean we have to be violent or horrible to anyone who was personally involved in that. I think particularly the traitorous class of people who have encouraged and allowed it, especially from sort of Blair's time onwards when the numbers really hiked up, including the Conservative Party. You know, rich people in the UK want this because it keeps, again, rents up, wages down, makes unionisation a lot harder. There's a leftist case against it. There's even an environmental case against it. But World War II has defined the culture to say any kind of sense of healthy boundaries or healthy nationalism is wrong. And it's indoctrinated really a kind of self-hatred in people, which I'll come to. I mean, let me just ask you this. Had the mid-20th century Germans invaded, how would it be worse? I mean, they didn't actually hate the British. Moustache Man actually had a certain affinity for the British. It probably would have been like the invasion, the occupation of France, for example. Sort of not pleasant, not desirable. But would they have torn down all the beautiful buildings? That's something that's happened in the UK. Would they have done what we've done to our own economy? Would they have flooded the country with people with very different values? Forget about skin colour, it's more about values. Would it have been worse had Operation Sea Lion happened and the Germans somehow managed to get across the channel? Would it have been worse? Like, that's a question we don't ask. Here's another way of looking at it. Would anyone in the UK fight for the UK now? I mean, there's surveys, you can see the YouTube's done. Young people are like, no. A lot of young people now are like, no, because my parents are from Pakistan and I don't have any allegiance to this country. What are you talking about? There isn't that same allegiance, and there's also a moral decay that I'll come on to. So the idea here is not just that we've been invaded, but our spirit has also been utterly broken. Okay, third way we lost the war. We are effectively an authoritarian state now. Now, I'm not going to say a fascist state, because again, this is overused, because of this constant fighting for the moral ground of World War II. Everyone's like, you're a fascist, you're far right, no, you're far right. So it's not fascism, because that word actually means something. You can look it up, it's from the Italians onwards. But we are in many ways authoritarian. We don't have freedom of speech. I could get in serious trouble for this video, which is factually based, it's opinion based. The fact that we have laws around hate, these really strange Orwellian laws, which say, hate, I mean, that's a feeling. How can that be a law? Offence, like how can that be a law? There is a two-tier justice system. We have, like the mid-20th century Germans, we have a racially tiered justice system, like in this country. People are being arrested for memes. There is no free speech anymore. And again, because World War II defines what is morally permissible, and that has moved further and further left, what counts as far right and outside of the first sort of morally allowable, now legally allowable, that's moved further and further left, right? I posit this. If you took a bunch of guys who fought in World War II, their views would now be, for Britain, to be clear, their views would be considered far right. My granddad's views, even as an Irish immigrant volunteer, would be considered far right. Yeah, so this video could get me in trouble. It's almost certainly going to get demonetized. I might get stopped at Heathrow, have my phone taken off me under anti-terrorism laws. This has happened to other YouTubers. I might be detained without the right to remain silent. This has happened to people on YouTube. Look it up, Lord Miles, for example. Why? Because of this World War II hypervigilance. I'm laughing because it's absurd. We do live in an authoritarian police state. I'll be walking around London today. I'll be on camera at least 200 times. So some people say it's 200 times on average a day in the UK, maybe more like 2,000 in London. I will be surveilled. I'm being surveilled online. The government have access to the back rooms of all the social media accounts, YouTube, etc. My phone spies on me. This is like common knowledge now. Like no one's doubting, I think, that their phone is spying on them in their own house. So George Orwell, who was a socialist actually, but George Orwell, of course, predicted this, the double think. People often think of the sort of cameras of 1984, which is the case. now in the UK. But what he was really good at was how people control language. So language has become controlled. The new sins that we have now, right? Like Islamophobia, the psychologizing, which is something the Soviets did, and the use of certain language to force us into a way of thinking and to not allow us to think in a certain way. So I would say, yes, we live under an authoritarian state. The fact that I'm anxious to make this video, the fact that my team regularly say, don't make videos like this, Mark, it's bad for business, we're going to get deplatformed, it will get demonetized. It's not a Nazi state. Oh, I said it, bleep that out. It's not a mid-20th century German state. It's not a fascist state, but it is an authoritarian state that doesn't allow free speech. There is no doubt about that. So this is another reason I say we've lost World War II, because we have lost our freedom. Okay, last reason we lost World War II. World War II is often presented as a moral war, a just war. And I think, there is definitely a case for that. I would say, though, that the moral decay in the UK is such that we can say what the events that started in World War II that led to this kind of global consumer money-based culture rather than any kind of values-based culture have meant we have lost. I think our grandparents would be fought in World War II will be disgusted at the average morality. I was just at a celebration of VE Day in Islington, so it's a major central area of London. There was like a dozen people there. Like no one actually cared. There was a few like hoodie youth around who didn't actually know what World War II was, from what I could hear them saying. They were sort of, what is this VE thing? And the general ethics and morality of people as such is degraded through materialism, leading to hedonism, leading to narcissism and narcoticism. I break this down in some of my other videos. The materialistic culture that really ramped up after World War II has led to a moral decay of the entire society, where people wouldn't be willing to fight for the country, don't have a sense of the Volk, the people don't have a sense of what was fought for in World War II. Yeah, Churchill managed to quote, like, what are we fighting for if not, our own culture? There's quotes from that from Churchill, and it's like, well, what are we fighting for? If I look around in London today, I just see hedonism and materialism. Young people want fame. Most older people just want money, status. We have no moral spine. We have lost the moral war for our culture. I think this is very obvious at this point. If you look at the mental health of people, you'll see how we are incredibly miserable as a society. You can see that with the self-medication of alcohol and drugs. You can see that in the rates of self-deletion, another thing I can't say on YouTube. See, I'd say there's a strong case that we've lost the moral war, and that started with what happened after World War II. Another aspect of this, of course, is that our institutions, starting with the universities, now all the mainstream institutions, we actually lost World War II to the Soviets, right? We lost World War II to communism 2.0. The diversity politics, the supposed diversity politics, which just means anyone who isn't white British. That's all. Like diversity flag, it means anyone who doesn't breed and anyone who isn't white British. That's all it means. That is what it's against. It's like the Orwellian stuff. It's the opposite of what it's saying. So all that stuff is essentially communism 2.0. Okay, it's neo-Marxism. So woke is neo-Marxism. That is now the dominant religion of the culture. If you don't think it's religious, and that is essentially the ethos we lost out to, as the pseudo-religion, if you will, of communism in a slightly different format, where instead of sort of bourgeoisie and working class, it's white people and all the other sections, as they're called, everyone else. Ask a liberal friend this. Ask them, what's too little racism? Blows their mind. Because of World War II defining the narrative. Now, any virtue becomes a vice in big enough form, right? So anything, I'm not for racism, racism is bad. But is it the ultimate evil as defined by the World War II narrative? Problem with that is you start getting into not first diminishing returns, there's sort of supply and demand issue others have pointed out with anti-racism, and eventually a racism against oneself, eventually sort of the witch hunts around that, the lack of boundaries, the lack of borders, the lack of national pride, and a form of self-hatred. If you ask the average guy in Islington, who the low testosterone, poisoned, modern, kind of camp male of East London and North London, if you ask them what's great about Britain, you'll get a sarcastic response. You wouldn't have from my granddad or the soldiers he fought with in World War II. You'll get the sarcastic response of guilt and self-hatred. They'll say, colonialism and racism. a kind of self-hatred develops. And I think that is hugely unhealthy psychologically. So World War II was the founding mythos of modern international money power liberal culture. So liberal, I don't just mean left wing, that we do have this communist philosophy. I mean the money power liberality of godlessness, of landlessness, of lack of community, of lack of soul. This is why we actually lost World War II. I honestly don't see a case at this point that we won it.